The temperature in the north woods of Maine was hitting 12 degrees Fahrenheit. It was late November, the peak of the winter hunting season, and I was sitting inside a wooden deer stand bolted 12 feet high into a massive pine tree. The U.S. Forestry Department calls this sector area for a dense and mapped wilderness stretching over thousands of acres near the Canadian border. The sun had just dropped below the horizon, leaving the forest in a freezing, purple twilight. I had my high-powered hunting rifle resting on my knees, my eyes scanning the snowy clearing below. The wind was dead calm, making the crunch of every falling leaf sound like a gunshot. Around 5:30 p.m., a strange, heavy fog started rolling in from the valley, thick and smelling faintly of copper. Suddenly, the birds stopped chirping. The distant howling of coyotes that had been echoing all evening cut off instantly. A suffocating silence crashed down on the woods. That was when I saw it through the gray mist. A massive buck, easily a 12-point deer, stepped out from the thick pine trees into the snowy clearing. It was huge, its fur a dark, patchy gray. I slowly raised my rifle, aligning the crosshairs of my scope directly with the animal's shoulder. My fingers squeezed the cold metal of the trigger halfway down. I held my breath to steady my shot. Then the deer stopped moving. It turned its head slowly, staring directly up into the tree where I was hiding. Through the magnification of my scope, my heart skipped a beat. The animal's eyes didn't look like a deer's eyes at all. They were placed flat on the front of its face, perfectly circular, completely white, and filled with a terrifying, intelligent malice. It didn't look scared. It looked like it had been searching for me. Before I could process the fear freezing my veins, the creature did something that shattered my sanity. It slowly cracked its front legs backward, lifting its massive upper body off the snow, and stood completely upright on its hind legs. It was over 8 feet tall. Its front hooves elongated, twisting and snapping into long, bony fingers with jagged black claws. The joints in its legs made a loud, sickening popping sound as they rearranged themselves to support its vertical weight. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't breathe. Every survival instinct I had was screaming that I was looking at something that violated the laws of nature. This wasn't an animal. This was the ancient nightmare the native legends always warned about. I panicked. I squeezed the trigger. Bang! The loud roar of my rifle shattered the silence of the forest. The heavy caliber bullet struck the creature dead center in the chest. I saw its gray flesh tear open. But it didn't fall. It didn't even flinch. It just stood there in the snow, staring at me through its hollow white eyes. Then its chest wound began to close up, the skin stitching itself back together in a matter of seconds, pushing the crushed lead bullet out onto the blood-stained snow. The creature opened its jaw. It split open from ear to ear, stretching wide, revealing rows of black, jagged human-like teeth. It let out a sound. It was a perfect mimicry of a man screaming in pure, agonizing terror mixed with a low, vibrating growl that shook the wooden floor of my deer stand. "Help me! Somebody help me!" The voice was human, but the tone was entirely empty of emotion, like a machine playing back a recording. The entity took a long, heavy step toward my tree. Its long, clawed arms scraped against the frozen snow. I scrambled backward inside the small wooden box, dropping my empty rifle. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely grab the ladder behind me. I knew the wooden structure wouldn't protect me. The creature was already at the base of the tree. I heard the thick bark of the pine tree tearing apart. It was climbing, the heavy, rhythmic thuds of its claws digging into the wood moved up the trunk at an impossible speed. The smell of metallic blood and wet rot filled the air inside my stand. I pulled out my survival knife, backing into the furthest corner, staring at the small wooden trapdoor on the floor. Suddenly, the scratching stopped. The silence returned, thicker than before. I looked up. 2 long, impossibly thin gray hands broke through the thin plywood roof of my stand, showering me with splinters. The massive, horned head of the creature pushed down through the shattered roof, its wide white eyes staring directly into mine from just inches away. Its vertical jaw was dripping with a thick, black saliva that hissed as it hit the cold floor dot in a moment of pure adrenaline. I drove my hunting knife upward with all my strength, plunging the blade straight into the creature's neck. The entity let out a deafening, metallic shriek. It reeled backward, losing its grip on the structure, and crashed 12 feet down through the branches onto the hard ground below. I didn't wait to see if it would stand up again. I dived out of the open side of the stand, landing heavily in the deep snow. The impact sent a shooting pain through my right ankle, but the terror kept me moving. I dragged my broken leg, crawling and sprinting blindly through the dark forest toward the main highway. I ran for 3 miles in the freezing dark, hearing the snapping of branches and that distorted human voice echoing behind me the entire time. I burst onto Route 4 just as a state trooper's car was passing by. I collapsed onto the asphalt, screaming for help. The police never found the creature. They found my deer stand completely ripped to shreds, the heavy wood splintered like matchsticks, surrounded by giant bipedal tracks and the snow that vanished into the deep valleys. I moved out of Maine the next week. I sold all my gear. Because now, every time I hear a twig snap in the backyard or a voice calling from the dark, I remember those white eyes staring through the roof, and I know that in Area 4, the hunter is always the prey.